For the state of our rural economies, particularly out in the West, be it agriculture or some of the recreational ends, water is obviously key. We've got a deep concern in the state of Colorado from a directive that was coming out of the Forest Service that was going to require, as a conditional use of permit, for our ski areas to be able to sign over water rights that they had paid for, they had developed, and were on their balance sheet to the federal government. This obviously is contrary to Colorado water law. Private property rights is going to inhibit their ability with signing over of those water rights to be able to leverage their resources to be able to keep people employed. The directive that came out of your agency was struck down in court because it did not comply with the Administrative Procedures Act. But yet again, we see the federal government and your agency going back after Colorado water, Western water, in terms of conditional uses of permit. Mark Amadei's district out of Nevada had a rancher, BLM lands, that was required to sign over their water rights. So given the subversive nature that this has to state law in Colorado, and what this directive will really represent, the potential negative impacts to our local communities, I guess I would like to have a little better understanding of why your agency feels that this is an appropriate use of agency resources and a course of action.
Well, Congressman, as you were asking that question, I was thinking about my son, who's a lawyer in Colorado, telling me the advice he gave me is never to get into water law issues. It's complicated.
We'd appreciate letting you let us have Colorado have that.
Well, I appreciate that. I think the Forest Service learned a lesson in terms of approaching this issue. We obviously did not provide enough notice and enough clarification and understanding. That's why we've gone back and we're.
But you're still going to pursue federal preemption of Colorado water rights?
Well, I think we're in the process of reviewing precisely what we were thinking about and seeing whether or not we could respond in some way, shape, or form to the concerns that have been expressed. I will tell you that the focus here is making sure that we use our forests, our U.S. forest lands, in the most appropriate way to conserve and preserve water. One of our driving principles of forest management is water management, because we recognize how precious the water is. And I think that the impetus for this was really starting with that concern, but recognizing that we need to balance that with the interests of those who need the water for economic purposes, the ski industry specifically. So I think...
Has there ever been any violation, any sale of water other than for those purposes?
I can't tell you that, Congressman. I don't know. And
I
I'm happy
actually
to
know
check.
the answer to that question. It's no.
Okay, well...
so I guess the question actually, Mr. Secretary, is why is the federal government continuing to pursue a water grab in western states when we already have water law which works?
Well, it may very well...
It's a private property right in our state.
It may very well be that policy is going to be different than what we initially proposed, because we learned from that lesson of not providing adequate notice and an opportunity to be heard. So their folks are looking at this now and trying to rethink this. I think the goal for us is making sure that as we use our forested areas, we use them in the best possible way to preserve and conserve water resources.
And I hope there'll be heavy consideration, again, for the state water rights, state law, and private property rights. It should not be preempted by the federal government. And one other area I'd like to be able to move on, and I applaud some of the efforts to be able to grow some of our exports. And you noted that with the President's sequestration that we may well see some impacts actually to our ability to be able to export. San Luis Valley, we have a lot of potatoes that we'd like to be able to export down into Mexico. Can you give us an update on where that's at? It seems like in dealing with the Mexican government that we're having a real inability to be able to export our potatoes, and they're trying to use some of the phytosanitary issues to be able to inhibit that.
Well, this is a good example of those circumstances where barriers are created that have no justification in science, and we think are contrary to agreements. And we've been working with the Mexican government to create a process by which our potato access to their markets would be expanded significantly. We had an agreement with Minister Mayorga, who was of the previous government, to potentially open up that market. We're going through a process now with the Mexican government to sort of refine that agreement and the technical aspects of it. And the hope is that with the new administration that we will be able to carry that agreement forward and ultimately see access. We've had some success in reopening the beef market in Mexico, and that gives us some degree of optimism that this is an opportunity for us to also reopen that potato market. It's very, very limited, and we don't think it's justified.
My time's expired. Thank you, sir.
The gentleman's time has expired, and now the chair would recognize the gentleman.